Good evening and thank you for tuning into another video. This week we're going to be looking at the still unidentified Long Island serial killer. Now I just want to take this moment to say thank you so much for 50 subscribers, and this seems like a relatively small milestone, but it actually really does mean the world to me, so thank you. I hope you enjoy the video. Please don't forget to give me a like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with more murderous, mysterious and macabre content. The Long Island serial killer is an unidentified serial killer that is believed to have murdered between 10 and 16 people over a 14-year period from 1996, which is the year I was born, to 2010. He's also known as LISK or LISK. I'll just be referring to him as LISK from now. He's also known as the Gilgo Beach Killer and the Craigslist Ripper, as it's believed that he met most of his victims via adverts for sex work on Craigslist. He would then murder them before dumping their bodies along the Ocean Parkway near Long Island Beach. Long Island Beach sits between Gilgo and Oak Beach in Suffolk County, which is why he's sometimes known as the Gilgo Beach Killer. In December 2010, a police officer came across the skeletal remains of a woman in a burlap sack. The sack was almost disintegrated, meaning that the remains had been there for quite some time. Following the discovery of these remains, 3 more bodies were found just 2 days later in the same area. Richard Dormer, the Suffolk County Police Office Commissioner, said that 4 bodies found in the same location pretty much speaks for itself. It's more than a coincidence. We could have a serial killer. It seems that Suffolk County Police were actually quite quick to make the link between victims and also acknowledge the fact that they had a serial killer, which in terms of a solid investigation is definitely the right step, a step in the right direction. It's really good that they acknowledged the fact that they possibly had a serial killer. It means the investigation can be conducted properly and move forward correctly, as soon as possible. Sadly, a few months later, between March and April 2011, 4 more sets of remains were found in the same area of the Parkway. Police decided to expand their search in order to look for more possible victims and any evidence that may help them crack the case. This search was a success depending on how you view a success. Police started their search in Nassau County, and within days they had found a partial set of human remains, as well as a skull that did not belong to any other remains found so far. On April 22nd, 2011, 2 human teeth were found near where the skull was found just days earlier. By September 20th of 2011, the investigation was amping up and police released reconstructions of the 2 unidentified victims. They also released photos of jewellery that was found on a toddler and her mother, who were found in early April of 2011. By September 22nd of 2011, the police had actually received over 1,200 tips by email, text and phone calls, so it seems that the local residents of Long Island cared and they had a lot of information. Shannan Gilbert was a 24-year-old New Jersey native who was reported missing on May 1st, 2010. She was working as a sex worker / escort at the time of her disappearance. The last known sighting of Gilbert was in the Long Island area as she was running from a client's house in Oak Beach. Gilbert's driver, Michael Pack, found it odd that she was running away from him instead of towards him on the night she was last seen alive. Now, it seems that it's pretty common that many sex workers will have a driver or someone that they know to take them to clients' houses or local red light districts. It's so that they can feel safe, that someone knows all of the information, all of the details. It's more like a physical backup as well if you get difficult customers, people who refuse to pay, instances of sexual assault and rape. Sadly, that happens. It shouldn't, but it does, so it's always good that these women are taking precautions to keep themselves safe, and also for someone to have information if something like this sadly does happen. Another report states that the last time Gilbert was seen alive was when she was running from door to door of local residents, banging on their doors and screaming for someone to help her. Before anyone was able to react, she ran off into the night. A 911 call from Gilbert details her screaming and telling the operator, "Help, they are going to kill me." Now who is they? Because from all other evidence suggests, it seems that the Long Island serial killer is one person, but in her phone call she says they. On the week beginning the 4th of December 2011, some of Gilbert's clothes and personal belongings were found near where she had been last spotted alive. Just a week after this, her remains were found in a swamp, which was on December 13th, 2011. Police came to the conclusion that Gilbert's death was accidental and that she had accidentally drowned in the swamp, a conclusion that, for very obvious reasons, was not shared by Gilbert's mother or the public and local residents watching the case unfold. Now, personally, I think that this ruling may have been pretty plausible if Gilbert had not made that 911 call screaming that they are going to kill me, or, if she'd not been seen running door to door screaming for help and running away from her driver. But she did. She did both of those things, so personally I don't believe that it was an accident and then she drowned. Sort of believed that the police maybe just didn't care that much because she was a sex worker. Who knows? With radio silence on the case haunting Long Island residents, the police announced in December 2015 that they had officially called in the FBI to aid in the investigation. Now, the FBI had actually been involved with the recovery of the victims, but this was never publicised, probably to stop any sort of mass panic and hysteria in the local residents. The FBI agreed with the local police in saying that they heavily believed one killer was responsible for all of the murders of the 11 remains recovered so far. They also agreed that the killer had to be a Long Island native due to the secluded locations of the burial sites and knowledge of local sex workers. A profile was created by the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, which suggested that the killer was most likely a white male between the ages of 20 and 40 and was possibly native to the Long Island area. They even narrowed it down to the South Shore of Long Island, which is very specific. They also noted that his occupation or home life would give him access to burlap sacks. The Long Island serial killer also has a deep understanding or knowledge of how law enforcement operate, and of crime scene investigation techniques, including how to dispose of evidence or leave little behind. It's also possible that he may even have a tie to law enforcement, which has fueled his knowledge on evading capture. Now, some people think that Joel Rifkin, who is also from Long Island, is actually responsible for the string of killings between 1996 and 2010. However, Rifkin was interviewed from prison by Newsday in 2011, where he denied having anything to do with the murders, and I believe that if he had been responsible, he would have held his hands up and admitted it straight away. I'm pretty sure that he admitted to his other murders. Just seems very unlikely that if he was involved he wouldn't admit. He's already in prison for life, so he has nothing to lose. The police and FBI have 4 main suspects / persons of interest in the Long Island serial killer case, and I will go through them now and why they are suspected by the police and the FBI. Number 1. James Burke. James Burke was a frequent client with sex workers in the Suffolk County area and would often make women perform rough sex acts. One woman actually came forward and said that her and Burke had had rough sex during a party in Oak Beach and that Burke had choked her almost to death. Burke, interestingly, was also the Suffolk County Police Chief and was linked to the murder of Shannan Gilbert by the family, as in the Gilbert family, a defense attorney. He actually blocked an investigation into him as part of the LISK case while he was working as the Suffolk County Police Chief. Suspicious. In November 2016, Burke was sent to prison for 46 months, which is just over 3.5 years, for beating up a man who stole sex toys from his car. He also pled guilty to the charge of civil rights violation and conspiracy to obstruct justice. I hope that conspiracy to obstruct justice charge was because of the fact he had blocked the investigation into himself. Can only hope. Our second suspect is John Bittrolff. So, John Bittrolff is a Suffolk County resident who is also a convicted murderer, whose victims were also sex workers, and he was active between 1993 and 1994 respectively. Bittrolff is also suspected to have murdered a third woman, as well as, he's highly considered to be the main suspect for the Long Island serial killer case. Robert Biancavilla, a Suffolk County prosecutor, released a statement in which he theorised that Bittrolff was most likely a Long Island serial killer due to the similarities between his crime scene and the Long Island serial killers. His DNA was linked to victims in 2014 around Manorville, which is where he lived and also where 2 of the Long Island serial killer victims were found. Interestingly, the victims were found just 3 miles away from his home, which means that it's highly likely that Bittrolff was responsible, since serial killers like to hunt around the areas where they are most comfortable. He was also a hunter, which gave him the perfect excuse to be awake early and covered in blood. What better excuse than being a hunter? His neighbours recalled that he loved to stalk and mutilate animals, and he even once cut out the heart of a deer he had just shot and ate it raw in the woods. That's disgusting. He also apparently killed animals during his childhood, which, as we know, one of the classic signs of psychopathy in the McDonald triad. That's not an indicative or diagnostic tool. That's not to say that everyone who hurts animals is a psychopath. That's not to say that everyone who's a psychopath is dangerous and a murderer. It's just something to consider. For me, personally, it feels like Bittrolff is one of the most likely suspects in the Long Island serial killer case. If not, he is definitely responsible for more than 2 murders. And police really, really need to dig into him to find the dark truth. I definitely believe in the last part. If he's not the Long Island serial killer, then he's definitely up to some other shit that needs to be investigated. So our third suspect is Joseph Brewer. He's an Oak Beach resident, and he was also one of the last people to see Shannan Gilbert alive on the night of her disappearance. Gilbert had actually been hired by Brewer on the night she disappeared, which had been arranged through Craigslist, which is one of the websites that the Long Island serial killer frequented as his hunting ground. Brewer also testified that Gilbert arrived at his house before she started to freak out and began running from door to door, screaming and pounding on them for help, that someone was trying to kill her. This matches up with the testimony of residents who saw Gilbert that night and the 911 call placed by Gilbert herself. So her inquest and, final cause of death kind of seems like bullshit to me. Because not only do you have Brewer's testimony, you have other residents, plus a 911 call. It just doesn't seem like she would have drowned accidentally, unless it was dark, she accidentally, got herself into a swamp, got herself so worked up into a frenzy and so panicked that she drowned. But with the Long Island serial killer case and her case, it seems so unlikely that she drowned. That's just a personal thought. Police actually did investigate Brewer and his connection to Gilbert, but came to the conclusion that Brewer wasn't involved in the murder of Gilbert, nor is he the Long Island serial killer. He was officially cleared as a suspect, however, I feel like this could be a mistake by the police, and for me he's still a strong suspect. I wouldn't count him out right now. Dr. Peter Hackett was the neighbour of Joseph Brewer in the Oak Beach area. Just 2 days after Gilbert was reported missing by her mother, Mary, she received a phone call from Dr. Hackett, who told her that Shannan was being looked after by a man who ran a home for wayward girls. 3 days after the original phone call to Mary, so 5 days after Shannan went missing, she received another phone call from Dr. Hackett telling her that he had never been in contact with Shannan, and he adamantly denied ever making the phone call to her in the first place, despite phone records proving that he had. Shannan's family actually filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Dr. Hackett in 2012, claiming that he had taken her in the morning after and drugged her, causing her death. Dr. Hackett is actually known to sort of insert himself into various different investigations, most likely to make himself feel important. Just seems quite suspicious to me, to be honest. Police found that his wife and 2 children were actually home during the night that Shannan Gilbert was last seen alive, so when she was seen running through the neighbourhood begging for help. If Dr. Hackett had brought Shannan into the family home, it would have been impossible to hide her from the family, so he was soon ruled out as a suspect. It seems that the calls placed to her mother was probably just some cruel, awful prank by him, to sort of get himself involved in this investigation, which is disgusting. The final suspect, so it's kind of 5, but not really. You could call this 4th or 5th. The final suspect that we have is James Bisset, who committed suicide just 2 days after Shannan Gilbert's body was discovered. Now, this could be a very sad coincidence, but what drew people's suspicion to Bisset was that he owned a nursery, so a plant nursery, and he had access to none other than burlap sacks, which many of the Long Island serial killer victims were found in. Local police didn't even have Bisset on their radar as a suspect. To me, it seems that Bisset's suicide was just a sad coincidence, and as he's not here to defend himself, it's unfair to place such a rumour and speculation on him without any hard evidence. Here is a list of the victims. Some of the victims are identified, some remain sadly unidentified, and some have not even been officially linked to the Long Island serial killer but are heavily suspected to be linked. Maureen Barnes, 25, from Norwich, Connecticut. Barnes was an escort who advertised via Craigslist, which, as we know, is a popular hunting ground for the Long Island serial killer. Barnes left her home in Norwich, Connecticut on July 9, 2007 to spend the day in Long Island and was sadly never seen alive again. Melissa Barthelemy, 24, Erie County, New York. Barthelemy was also a sex worker who advertised her services through Craigslist. On July 10, 2009, she met a client before putting $900 into her bank account. She also tried to call her ex-boyfriend, but this went through to voicemail. After this, she was never seen or heard from again. Just a week after Barthelemy went missing, her sister, Amanda, started to receive what she could only describe as vulgar, mocking, and insulting phone calls from an unknown man using Barthelemy's phone. He asked Amanda if she was, quote, a whore like her sister. The calls became darker and darker, with the caller telling Amanda that Barthelemy was dead and he couldn't wait to watch her rot. That's awful. That's incredibly disturbing and horrible, especially when that's someone you care about so much. Amanda did inform police, and they were able to trace the calls to Madison Square Gardens in Manhattan. However, they were unable to find the identity of the caller. Barthelemy's mother also told police that during the time she went missing, she had made a lot of calls to the Manorville area of Long Island, which is the connection. Megan Waterman, 22, South Portland, Maine. Waterman was a sex worker who also advertised her services via Craigslist. Waterman went missing on June 6, 2010. Her and her boyfriend were actually due to meet up the day before, but Waterman never showed. At the time of her disappearance, she was staying at a motel in Hauppauge, New York. Hauppauge, New York is around 15 miles away from Gilgo Beach, so it's very possible that she used transport between the two areas to visit clients or to work on the streets. Her body was discovered in December of 2010, just 7 months after she was last seen alive. Amber Lynn Costello, 27, North Babylon, New York. New York, which is only around 10 miles from Gilgo Beach. At the time of her disappearance, Costello was also a sex worker who had a heroin addiction, and likely used sex as a way to feed her habit. On the night of her disappearance, September 2nd, 2010, she met with a client who specifically requested her and offered her $1,500 for her time. Sadly, this would be the last time Costello was ever seen alive. Her sister Kimberly has been on a determined path to use Craigslist, just like her sister did, in an attempt to lure out the Long Island serial killer. Now, I can only hope that he's been caught before her sister Kimberly meets him, and that she remains safe. The next set of victims, or remains, were discovered on March 29th and April 4th, 2011 respectively. The remains were of 2 women, a man, and a toddler. On April 11th, 2011, the partial remains and skull were found just miles away in Nassau County. Jessica Taylor, 20, from Manhattan, is the only victim from those discovered on March 29th and April 4th that has been formally identified. Taylor went missing in July of 2003, with her dismembered torso being found just weeks later on July 26, 2003. It is important to note that her torso was missing her head and hands. Taylor's torso was discarded like trash on the top of some scrap wood just off a road on the Long Island Expressway. Her torso was also placed on some plastic sheets, which most likely came from the killer when he had transported her body to the scene. Her tattoo had also been heavily mutilated, which indicated the fact that the Long Island serial killer had attempted to remove this because he knew that she could be identified by it. On March 29th, her skull, hands, and forearm were all found in Gilgo, finally meaning that her family had a full body for burial. Like every other single victim, Taylor had been a sex worker at the time of her disappearance. Jane Doe number 6. A head, right foot, and hands were all found during the searches mentioned above, with the rest of her remains actually being discovered back in November 2002. November 2000, correction. These remains were actually found in the same area where Jessica Taylor's remains were found, allowing police to make the connection. Jane Doe number 6's torso had been wrapped in garbage bags before being dumped in the woods near an access road, the access road from the Long Island Expressway, just very, very close to where Jessica Taylor's body was found. Her right foot had been cut off slightly higher than the ankle. This means 2 things. The killer didn't have a surgical or anatomical background, or that he was trying to hide something such as a birthmark or a tattoo. Jane Doe number 6's composite sketch was released in September 2011 and shows Jane Doe as being somewhere between 18 to 35, 5'2", and most likely a sex worker. Since the remains were in extremely bad condition, not much else is known about Jane Doe number 6. John Doe was found on April 4th, 2011 at Gilgo Beach, close to where the first lot of victims were found in December of 2010. Police described the scene as a young Asian male who died from blunt force trauma. They also released a composite sketch which shows him between the ages of 17 and 23, 5'6", missing 4 teeth, and had been deceased for between 5 and 10 years. Police also believe that John Doe was actually a trans woman who was murdered by the Long Island serial killer in rage when he found out that he hadn't had the operation. It's also possible that the Long Island serial killer killed him before they engaged in a sexual act and targeted him purely because he was a sex worker presenting as female. If he had been presenting as, male or, otherwise, I feel like it's very unlikely that the Long Island serial killer would have killed this John Doe, unfortunately. Baby Doe, 16 to 24 months old, was found just feet away from Jane Doe number 6. She'd been wrapped in a blanket and showed no signs of trauma. It was determined that via DNA testing that she was the biological child of Jane Doe number 3, who was found near Jones Beach State Park. Official reports state that Baby Doe was non-Caucasian, wearing a set of earrings as well as a necklace. It's unknown why Baby Doe was found so far away from her mother, in Jones Beach State Park. Peaches is an unidentified Jane Doe who was discovered on June 28, 1997. She had been dismembered and placed in Hempstead Lake State Park, in Lakeview, New York. Her body was found inside of a green plastic container, which was dumped at the side of the road near the lake. Peaches actually got her name because of the tattoo of a heart-shaped peach with a little bite out of it, with 2 drops falling towards her left breast. I've put the image on screen now for you. This sort of naming convention is actually very popular in Jane Doe cases, and it sort of gives the victim a name. It's sort of more personal than just Jane Doe number X. It sort of helps to bring their identity, name something that someone close to them would know they had. It sort of helps. Fast forward to April 11th, 2011 in Nassau County, where police had found skeletal remains inside of a plastic bag in Jones Beach State Park. This set of remains were known as Jane Doe number 3, but it was quickly found out that Jane Doe number 3 was the biological mother of Baby Doe. Due to Jane Doe number 3 and Baby Doe wearing the same sort of jewellery, and the DNA, a link was made between the two. In December 2016, investigators conclusively identified Peaches and Jane Doe number 3 as being the same person, meaning that her torso that was found 14 years before the rest of her remains was, and that Baby Doe actually belongs to Peaches, who is also known as Jane Doe number 3. The last unidentified victim attributed to the Long Island serial killer is known as Jane Doe number 7, who was found on April 11th, 2011 at Tobay Beach. The remains found at Tobay Beach were linked to a pair of severed legs found wrapped in a rubbish bag on Fire Island in 1996. All we know about Jane Doe number 7 is that she has a surgical scar on her left leg. There are many other victims who have been attributed to the Long Island serial killer but never formally linked, and it's highly unlikely until we know who the killer is that we'll be able to prove this and bring the families justice and closure that they deserve. With not much being known about most of his victims, or even the killer himself, we can only hope that advances in DNA technology and investigations will lead us to the Long Island serial killer and bring the families the justice and the closure they've been longing for and ultimately deserve. So, thank you for listening to this week's video. I would say I hope you enjoyed, but this is a very sad case, and I can only hope that soon I'll be able to bring you an update video and that this piece of trash will be in court and in prison and we'll see some justice. So don't forget to subscribe, give me a like, comment down below who you think is the most likely suspect. We can chat and debate about this in the comments. And remember, stay safe and stay spooky.